Welcome back again. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about using reverb in mastering. And the applications for reverb in mastering are, in some cases, I think quite obvious, but in other cases maybe a little bit less so. And some of you may be surprised to learn that reverb comes into play in mastering at all. The first one is using reverb to lengthen the tail of a song that's been cut off. And one of my pet peeves is that an overeager engineer or artist or producer will decide that they want to save a little bit of time in the mastering studio and cut the very beginning or the very ending of a song closely so that you don't have to worry about doing that in the mastering studio. In doing so, they think they're going to save themselves some money in the mastering session. But invariably what happens is that they cut the beginning too close, or they cut off something at the very end because their studio's noisy or they're not listening carefully, and suddenly you end up with a song in mastering where you wish the end of the piece could go on another couple of seconds. Or there might be a noise at the end of a mix and you have to pull a fade on the tail to get a ringing note down before the noise comes in and causes an interruption in the attention of the listener. So in any case, we might use reverb to extend the tail. And in this case, it's a pretty simple thing to apply reverb just to the very end, have it gradually rise as the last note decays, and try to create some sort of a sense of a natural extension of the last note for as long as need be. The second place that reverb comes into play in mastering is when you're trying to match the sound of two different recordings that are coming from two different acoustic spaces. One might be dry and one might be ambient, that are going to be included in a single album's worth of material. This comes into play most often when I'm working on something that comes from various orchestras from around the world. I've received recordings made in Seattle and Bratislava and Warsaw and Prague, and each engineering crew has their own aesthetic about how much reverb they like to allow to creep in, or ambience they like to have creep into the sound of their recording. And in some cases, they're bound by the dimensions of the space that the orchestra is playing in. So if I'm doing a record that's all by a single composer and their works and it's recorded in multiple places, I might apply some reverb to one of the recordings to bring them into a similar sonic universe when going from one to the next. The third instance when reverb might come into play in mastering is when I want to create a little bit of a sense of depth in a recording. There are those moments where I will have done everything that I can think of to do that seems to be making a recording sound better, with EQ, with compression, where I just want a very tiny sense of warmth and sort of a widening and deepening of the soundstage. And more EQ is just making it worse, more compression is just making it worse, and I'll try adding a hint of a very short, not very bright bit of reverb to the sound of the recording. My recipe is usually rolling off the top end of the reverb, setting the roll off somewhere around 2.5K or 3K, having a decay time of about 2/3 of a second, and just a little touch of it. And sometimes that gives me just that sense of depth that I'm after in a very natural way, in a way that an equalizer or a compressor is not able to do. You have to be careful, because if you add reverb to a heavy metal tune, or if you add reverb to a punk rock tune or something that really needs to maintain its immediacy and edge, reverb will soften the general sense of the program usually, but it can come in handy.